Bienvenidos y bienvenidas. So today we have one of our webinars for the Drexel Climate Change and Urban Health Research Center and the SALURBAL Climate Study. The webinar and all activities will be done in Spanish. So if you are interested in hearing interpretation to English and or Portuguese, you have to go back to down to where the Zoom buttons are and click on the little world symbol and switch to your preferred language. If you stay in the original language, you will hear it in Spanish. I want to point out that we have a few webinars coming up. In June, we'll have Stella Hartinger from Universidad Peruana Cayetano Heredia, and then in September and October, we'll have Michelle Bell from Yale University and Franco Montalto from Drexel. So I left Pablo Reed today, one of the co-investigators of the SALURBAL climate study, to introduce our special invited speaker for today. Gracias, Pablo.
Sí. Hola, buenas tardes a todos.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here presenting Pablo. It's funny that we met through these seminars cycle. I met him in Mexico. I hope we can meet again anytime soon. Just to introduce him, Pablo Sarricolea studied geography, territorial planning at the Universidad de Barcelona. He has a master's degree by Universidad de Barcelona and Universidad de Chile. He's also professor associate and director of the geography department at Universidad de Chile. He's an adjoint researcher of CR2, that it's a research center that it's very important back in Chile. So he has an important line of work over there and specialized in resilient cities within this CR2 cycle. He's also a researcher of the Center of Chile. His research is centered in urban climate and climate change. He used geomatic and teledetection within the cities of Chile. He has a lot of articles that have to do with some forestry fires in Chile and heat waves within the cities. He's like a rock star for all of us, for many of our students. So he has like a lot of interesting material. So I hope he can tell us about his work in Chile and that it's interesting for everyone here in SALURBAL. Pablo, go ahead. Thank you very much for the presentation. I hope we can meet each other in person. I work with people in public health before, with Carla Johansen, that works with you as well. And also I want to thank the host, to Kayla and Ana Diaz. Thank you very much, both of you. I'm going to start with my presentation now. Where there has been collaboration from different colleagues. I've mentioned a couple of them who are part of this project, projects of Universidad de Chile as well, of Universidad Playa Ancha that are cooperating as well with us to move forward, to understand a little bit of these socioeconomic inequalities that we have within the cities and that can be seen in health-related topics, especially during the pandemic. We realized that people that had better income, like better economic conditions, they did not suffer as much the pandemic issues as people with low income that had less space, that had to use more public transportation, so they were exposed to the pandemic. So this can also be seen with the heat waves and pollution, and even with topics that Pablo's team is working in relation to premature death of fetus because of an excess of heat. Urbanization leaves a footprint at a global level. In that QR code, you will be able to access this map with the different urban areas in the houses back in 2021. There you can see that a great part of Latin America exceeds 85% of urban areas, and the population is mainly urban. So the solutions that we have to try to find are located within cities. In other regions, for example, like Africa, you may see the urban rates are lower. Around the world, we have exceeded more than 50% of the population that are living within cities. Cities are good. They generate a different number of benefits, like they are close to health centers, they are close to work, to different activities, to have access to education. But we need to improve the management and the planning of these cities so they can be better spaces and for them to generate less stress, less diseases, among other issues. If you will see the map of the different cities, like in a greater detail, there are a lot of graphs where you can see the cities at night, and the pollution that cities generate. We can say that 3% of the globe, it's an urban surface. We've mentioned that 57% of worldwide population live within cities, and they are responsible of 75% of the energy consumption. That is the solutions, thinking about climate change, are within cities, because they are also responsible of 80% of the greenhouse gases emission. The main responsible for climate change are these greenhouse gas emissions that have increased from the industrial era. Now we are like 410 parts per million of CO2. So the cities have to have a better planning. That's our message, and that's why we think that cities are key to comply with the different ODS, like a safe community, action for climate change, among others. In Chile, that it's a country in Latin America, that it's one of the countries with the best economic condition, there are a lot of inequalities. Planning, they take care of urban areas, but we're still missing efficiency and to have better governance. So many of the plans are an invitation to action, but it doesn't establish goals that are mandatory for the different municipalities, for the different cities. So there is a lack of regulation to manage these and to comply with this. We have done some progress with like a local planning for climate change at a ministry level. They have been working on the climate change adaptation plans that are oriented to cities, and that's where we have to pay a lot of attention. That is, our science has to do with public policies. Like that's a little bit of our message. And obviously, cities where we see that climate change affects more severely. We have some wildfires that have been mentioned by Professor Pablo Ruiz that affect the interface in the urban area and forestry area, but also heat waves. In the South Hemisphere, these heat waves are not as hard as in the Northern Hemisphere, but it could cause problems. For example, talking about transportation, we have seen this in other regions around the world. For example, in England, where back in 2022, there was a heat wave that generated some train issues because there was a delayed on the materials and the train rails, so they could not circulate. Those are temperatures that are less than 40 degrees, but the engineer designs are not prepared for those temperatures that they had back in 2022, the summer of 2022, back in the North Hemisphere. What we are studying, and it's been a while now, are these heat waves. And what we see here is that Santiago City could be above 5 degrees related to the rural areas. For example, Providencia or Santiago, that are like in the center of the city, temperatures could be 5 degrees higher than in those rural areas. The heat waves are like an positive thermal anomaly between the center of the city and the non-urban periphery. There are different ways to study these heat islands, that would also call them like heat and cool islands, because they migrate during day and night to different parts of the city. So we can study sub surfaces, for example, uh, the metro could be studied. We know that there is a lot of like accumulation of heat in these trains. We can study that with satellite imaging to understand the heat island, the surface one, as well as they can study the effect of the temperature within a year. We have had some progress between surface temperatures, and we want to understand the relationship that there exists between these two strategies. From the United States Environmental Agency, we have the next table that shows the surface temperature behavior during the day. There are many differences between air temperature and what satellites measure, because every urban structure generates shades. There is like some water coverage that can cause a local cooling. Areas that are built, there's a lot of variability when we talk about the air temperature. However, during nighttime, during daytime, even when you are in the shades that are part of these buildings, the heat islands could be negative. During nighttime, air temperature and surface temperature measured by satellites tend to get even, because we don't have the component of solar radiation. We only have some energy leakage. So the temperature, the air temperature and the satellite temperature will be the same. That means that the satellite transform very close to air temperature at night time. So during nighttime, the cities should have a positive heat island. Positive in the sense that heat island and not cool island. As I have already mentioned, there are different ways to address urban climate study, and we from Universidad de Chile are working mainly with drones. We are working with climate stations that are automated, and we're also working with satellites. We're trying to do like a comprehensive analysis of it. Santiago de Chile, it's the capital of the country, but we're also working other areas. In particular, the biggest one in the coastal area. Why did we choose coastal area? Because there is a higher number of threats that affects coastal cities. For example, the increase of the sea level. So these are the ones that are growing the most. Like we have Gran Valparaíso and Gran Concepción that are the two biggest cities after Santiago. And the other cities that are also growing at a high speed, one is in the north part of city, Iquique, and La Serena, Coquimbo, that have been growing because of migration of people that works in the mining in the north part of Chile. Some miners used to live in Santiago before, but now they are choosing to live in cities that are closer to their work, mainly in Antofagasta and also in the Tarapacá region where Iquique is. Here we have a couple of pictures. The cities of Latin America, especially in Chile, are cities that are not very high. As you can see in these both pictures, Iquique has an important growth in the number of buildings that look here kind of isolated, but houses do not exceed like a 2 or 3 floor house. And that's the same in Gran Concepción and the rest of the country. Vertical urbanization in buildings that are above 9 floors or maybe like 20 floors. It's something new in South America, especially in Chile. Another thing is that we have a lot of migrants, like the poor people in our country are generating this informal housing in the periphery of the city. Iquique, for example, has Alto Hospicio that is 500 meters over sea level. Behind that dune that you can see here in this picture of Iquique, there is a high number of population there, low-income population that have this informal housing there. Valparaíso is going through a similar situation, but you're also like can see a couple of buildings there in the Valparaíso comuna, but these buildings are more frequent, for example, in Viña del Mar, Concón, because of tourism, they are increasing the number of houses that are over 20 floors. As I mentioned, we are installing some climate stations in the 4 areas that I mentioned. Great part of these stations are ours. These are our stations. They are open in an EcoWheat platform. They're low cost stations. They are the same brand. So it allows us to have equal data collection. Here in Valparaíso, more than 20 ml. And today morning, the temperature, the air temperature was like 4 and 11 degrees in a couple of stations that we have in Valparaíso. We're going to place these weather stations in Iquique, La Serena. We're going to continue in Valparaíso and La Concepción. And we also have a project that is led by a colleague here in Santiago, where we're also going to have a couple of stations. The idea is to compare the air temperature with the one that is being registered by the satellites. 2 years ago, we published this that explore these socioeconomic inequalities and the heat island in Santiago. And we have support ourselves using some big data platforms that had allowed us to have access to a lot of satellite imaging data, and we are working on that for the rest of the cities. Methodology has been progressing. If you want to have more details, you can send me an email. I'll be happy to help you if I can. Or you can also access to this article that you see in the slide. There has been some adjustment to improve it. From 2022 up until now, we had access to better data, like better socioeconomic data for these cities that divide the population up to 7 groups, where we see the average income for these households, for the different families. Let's say that $1 are 1,000 pesos chilenos. So the richest people in Chile has a monthly income next to $7,000, while the poor population has a monthly income of like $360 per month, like a whole family. That usually a family in Chile is formed by 3 or 4 people that live with that amount of money. So we have seen in some satellite data that rich population has a better urban climate than the middle income population, and the poorest population, there is a mix because it depends a lot of the materials and the environment where they are located. Sometimes they have some green areas, but the quality of the house is bad. So their climate conditions within the house are bad. So let's take into consideration that we are studying the air temperature, the outside temperature. We are not studying what happens within houses. A topic that for us is key, it's to identify the candidate areas to a rural point that allow to calculate the difference of the different heat islands. As we mentioned, this heat island is a thermal anomaly, positive, and we need to have some reference for it. Literature suggests that the center should have similar characteristics to the urban center. So they have to have the same weather and some altitude characteristics. They should not be very much different from the center of position, solar radiation, and some bodies of water that it's no more than 2 kilometers to be able to have candidates to study the urban climate considering these heat and cooling islands. We have developed a methodology to be able to run this analysis. In the case of Gran Concepción, this place, it's the site that it's the rural reference for our study when we talk about Concepción. And we've done it the same way for the rest of the city. Let's talk about the Concepción case scenario. This is the distribution, like socioeconomical distribution of Concepción. If you can see, people with a higher income are in San Pedro de la Paz, and Chihuayante, and the poor population is located in Penco, in the coastal part of San Pedro de la Paz, in Hualpén, Talcahuano. That's where we have the poor population group. So we can say that they are highly segregated. If we see what happens with this daily heat island, we can see that Gran Concepción has a daily heat island, and this is because it has some forestry, different trees that allowed for the day to feel the heat between Hualpén and Concepción. And it's a summer heat island. What does data say? That the population with a higher income, they do not suffer from heat island, while like mid-class population could have heat island of more than 7 Celsius degree, like a 7 degrees difference between the surface temperature and what they suffer. Well, population with better income have better thermal conditions. If we can see the images for the night time, we can see that Concepción has cold island at night time that are more intense during winter time. So when in the periphery, Hualpén, when there is 0 degrees, in the center of Concepción, it's -2 degrees. -2 degrees in relation to what it's recorded in the city. And that makes us think that Concepción is affected on daily heat islands during daytime and cold island for in winter, where people could have died because of this cold. So this is a need to start taking measures and try to generate climate shelters for winter time in a city in the center part of Chile. If we see the cold island, the ones that do not suffer cold weather are people with a high income, while the middle class could have some issues. And last but not least, what we do was to mix the heat islands with cold island, and we generated this map. And this purple color, you can see the worst conditions that are between Hualpén and Concepción, because in summer they suffer from heat island, and during winter time, nighttime, they suffer from cold island. And this would allow us to analyze what happens with their health conditions, socioeconomical conditions in the case of Concepción. Another of our cities are La Serena, Coquimbo. It's a very much segregated city, as you can see. We did the same analysis, and the difference with Concepción is very much similar of what happened in the rest of the cities within the north part and south part of Chile. During the day, the city is cool, and the heat island happen at nighttime and also during winter time, as you can see in the slide. If we divide it per neighborhood, the neighborhood that has a higher intensity of heat island, it's in Coquimbo or Cochrane, with more than 2.5 night heat degrees during winter time. It could be a benefit if we see it from the point of view of like winter time, like winter heat could reduce the costs of energy. We did the local climate areas analysis that we use for urban climate studies that are 17 classes, 10 urban and 7 non-urban. And for all this area, we are seeing that what is happening with the heat. It is relevant because, for example, in the typology number 7, in general, there are informal houses, some camps, as we call it in Chile, while the 9, number 9, there are like concrete houses where they have green areas, swimming pools, like urban areas for people that have high income. I'm going to pass this one. What happens per socioeconomical groups? And this is important to take into consideration. People that has higher income, again, they do not suffer of heat island. They do not suffer of heat island or cold island. As you can see here, the ones that suffer from these cold islands are people with low income, and also people with low income suffer from heat islands. So there is something that we need to improve about the environment where people live, maybe to have more green areas, access to water, something that could refresh the air. Then we have mixed different scales by using drones. So we have some drones flights cooperated with colleagues here at Universidad de Chile. In the case of La Serena, we have also had drones in Quilpué, Valparaíso, Gran Concepción, and Iquique. So we are having some progress on this. What I can see again, it's people like low-income people. We have C1A groups that makes around $4,000. We can see that there is some socioeconomical effect based on the temperature. This is an example for you to see what we can see by using the drones. This is an image that shows in red the vegetation areas, and finally the temperature. Where there is vegetation, green areas, surfaces are colder. When there are permeable cover, we have higher temperature. So there is a relationship between the temperature that is registered by the satellite and drones or the air temperature. In Iquique, we're also working during nighttime because the heat islands in Iquique are at nighttime and during summertime. This is Sentin Express images. And Valparaíso, where we have the drones, we have something interesting. It is a city, like a big city, more than 700,000 inhabitants, where we can see that during summertime, the heat islands are in Culcoren Alemana community, but at nighttime, the mild heat islands that are between Valparaíso and Viña del Mar. So we have to have this information to see when are we going to have these heat islands. This is what we did in Santiago, just to have it as reference of the socioeconomical differences. Quilcura, Contemí, and Rainbow are the areas that suffer from these heat islands, and these communities are of people that have low income. Las Condes, for example, they have better income, so they do not suffer as much of these heat islands. Doing an statistical analysis for it, we were able to see that there are correlations between night heat islands in Santiago and the socioeconomical level. We have published that, and we have continued working with other areas. For example, if there is some trend on urban temperature, if there is possible to detect some change areas, we do have some areas that are warming up. And in the future, what we want to do with people like you that are related to public health at Universidad de Chile is to see if there is relationships between temperature, health, what happens with the particular matter, like to better understand not only aesthetic aspects of the city itself, but also health-related aspects. Here we can see some trend maps. The city is getting warmer, like it could be more than 1 degree per decade. And this is relevant because in 100 years, climate change says that the temperature will have hit like 1.5 degrees. But here we can see 1 degree per decade. So as a summary, what I would like to say is that we believe that it is important to integrate urban technology and public health in cities because it is a very important topic to have some certainty during pandemic, diseases, pollution episodes, to think that socioeconomical groups, it's like the synthesis of many factors that could have some health conditioning, and sometimes that are related to the socioeconomical level and also the exposure to pollution. Some people are more exposed to pollution and for a greater number of hours. So they have worse conditions or like a lower life expectancy rate, as we have seen in the Latin American region. In the upcoming months, we're going to keep having these stations and we are going to share this information. So this information is going to be used for any scientific research if needed. And thank you very much for having me. Great. Thank you very much. Osama told me to take care of questions. So you can write down if you have any questions in the chat or in the question sections, if you have any. I have a question. I'm going to just do it here. So I will directly ask the question. When you present these like effects of this heat island, but I also like that you showed winter time. And I was wondering, in a couple of studies, like for some projections for the future, of the impacts that climate change has in mortality rate. For example, they talk about how the reduction of cold weather, because there's going to be an increase of temperature, there's going to decrease mortality rate, because at the end, cold weather also causes death. So have you thought about that when you study this heat island effect, like for winter, to think about how these areas that have a greater number of heat islands during winter time could be beneficial for them because it's not going to be that cold? Yes, actually many researchers talk about this, that these heat islands have a positive impact, but also negative impact. The negatives are during summertime, because of the heat waves. And during winter time, the effects could be positive because we don't use that much heat to heat our homes. Or like a city level, there's like a better temperature. But I I would say be careful, because many times we just simplify the fact that the planet is getting warmer, and we just think that it's like a cow's bell, that it's going to the hotter side. But what climate science says in general, it's that variability is increasing. That is, the Gauss bell is going down. The middle situations are not as frequent, and the extremes are growing for heat and cold. And I will be careful because it could make us decrease our support campaigns during cold waves. So I would be careful with it. But I do agree with you that there are some beneficial aspects of night heat during winter time. So we have to incorporate this information for public policies. The ideal will be that for a neighborhood to generate these ideal conditions for summertime and for wintertime. For example, trees, if they lose their leaf, it's good because during summertime we get some shade, and in wintertime, because they lose their leaves, we have to think about solutions that involve nature, that involve technology, and that has this double role to protect us in both extremes, whether it's heat or cold weather. I have a question from Horacio Rioja that says, a very nice conversation. Have you observed any adaptation strategy like a higher use of air conditioning or others, especially in the areas with the poor population? It's very much concerning, actually. I tried to find some data on the use of air conditioning for Santiago, because it's one of the hypotheses is that air conditioning generate more outside heat, like in the outside of houses, and they increase urban heat outside houses. So we have been trying to find solutions on the material of houses to reduce the use of air conditioning, because it also consumes energy and could also be an indicator of some energy issues. If we base everything on having access to air conditioning with electric energy, that prices are increasing, people will not have access to air conditioning or to heating systems. So we need to find some passive solutions, for example, to have some trees, and within the city, to protect houses, to have better construction materials, painting that allows to have some isolation. So the idea is for like housing like the differences from one to E, from A to E, based on their energy consumption, for houses from poor people to have the least conditions for them to be able to live in those houses. We have another question from Luis Angel Lopez. Dice, are there areas that are lived by people who have greater income? Why do they suffer less of these heat problems? Thank you for the question. People who have better income, they have some water bodies, talking about private swimming pools, because here in Chile, people that have money, many of them have swimming pools. They also have grass, and they have trees. And all of these elements help them to reduce outside temperature, water, vegetation, even the colors that they use to paint their houses have an effect in the energy accumulation during daytime. So many times white paint, painting makes for the energy to reflect and to not accumulate. So they have all of these advantages. Within the solutions that are being proposed, it's to reduce the grass size because of the water consumption. We know that 1 square meter of grass per year in Chile consumes like 2,000 liters of water per square meter of grass, so 2,000 meters of water. That's the rain of Valdivia, for example. So here we have just like 300. So we need to get 1,700 meters per square meter. That's a lot of water for a semi-desert region like ours. So the idea is to try to find solutions, maybe to have some trees that do not consume that much water, or different plants that do not use much water. That there are some species of plants that consume less water than grass. We have another question here that says, how do you do the estimation of the socioeconomical level at geographical level? I think that's interesting for the international audience to know how do you do that. Thank you for the question. In general, in Chile, we have some census for the housing population, a, a study group of the socioeconomical situation in the different houses. I don't remember the name. They created this matrix that allows to have this analysis between the income level, education level, and any goods that they might have within their homes. For example, before there was like you ask in the census, like, what type of goods do you have? Do you have access to internet, wideband, like mobile phones, air conditioning system? What type of heating that you may have, if you have like a refrigerator or any other goods. And that was part of a matrix that incorporated also people education level. If they had like a elementary, high school, a higher education, or if they had like any master or PhD, and that was part of the income level. What we have access, we actually have access to that data, to the income data that is generated by some marketing companies. And this data, they do not share it, but we established an agreement with Entel, that it's the phone company here, and we had access to that data, like the socioeconomical level per different urban areas. And you can also see by the type of job. In the census, they also ask a question, what do you do for a living? Like, what type of work do you have? So, and they measure like the average income, and that's part of the socioeconomical level. So like the head of the household, what does he or she work at? And if they had like a formal income. We have another question here from Kat Timmings. I would love to hear a little bit more about the surface typology in association with the temperature differences and how these results can be interpreted or presented to orient planning. And also, what experience have you had so far in relation to relationship with local authorities about planning? What's been the response based on these results? Have you communicated with anyone, like by urban planning or also health? Thank you for the question. The first part, there is an urban climate network that for a while now has, they have a web page where they have this local climate weather typology that is called Aguda. I'm going to put the link in the chat. Just give me a second. This organization, what they collect, it's a typology that was created by a researcher from Canada, and that generated this typology of 17 uses of the land. And this typology has been correlated around the world with temperature. So they even have a couple of tools that you can generate, that you can send data from some areas, like it's a 1 floor, 2 floor, 9 floor, and then they give you a classification of the city that you are interested in. So you can provide the data that you have collected on site, like from Santiago, I can send data from sites that it's like zone 1 for the typology, or this area is considered as a typology number 6, and they could give us that information. Internally, we did that internally. We did it on our own, but it's also valid. And there are many researchers that have used it for different cities around the world. Europe, it's complete. The United States also, it's complete. The local weather map for the states, it's very good. Actually, it's very much completed. In the rest of the world, they are having some progress little by little, so you can access information from it. And about the experience that we've had from this resilience and climate center, we've been in touch with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Areas that are in charge of climate change adaptation plan. So luckily, we are having some progress to be able to pass all this knowledge and for them to be part of the adaptation plans. So we are working with this group that includes people that have been working in other resilience centers in Stockholm, Chile, to generate different strategies that will be incorporated in the local adaptation plans. And this led by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Areas. So this is interesting to see how science can interact with public policies. I think this will be the last question. Is there the presence of exotic trees with a high evapotranspiration? That's a really good question, actually. In Santiago, we do have, we have a lot of exotic trees. I don't remember the scientific name, but it's a sort of a banana tree that provides good shade, but also has a lot of organic volatile compounds, and it causes some allergies about evapotranspiration. We haven't worked on details, but there are trees that generate a lot of evapotranspiration. You can see that in some neighborhoods that have a lot of humidity, and probably it brings a lot of humidity to air. So I think it will be also important to move forward on that line, to try to see other effects that we get from vegetation that goes beyond the reduction of temperature, like how we can measure it. There are algorithms that would allow to have the sentinel imaging from the European agency. And with this algorithm, we're working in a couple of sectors to calculate evapotranspiration. Thank you very much. I think there are no more questions. Thank you, Pablo, for the presentation. I want to remind everyone that we're going to have a special guest here in Drexel, June 5th. For the ones here in Philadelphia, you can register online with the QR code at the top. And for the ones who have this presentation, the online presentation, you can sign for Zoom. They all have